Uh-huh. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I begin in the name of Almighty Allah. I invoke His peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and ask Allah to extend His blessings to the Prophet's family and his companions and the men and women that walk steadily in their footsteps, and I ask Allah to make us among them. Allahumma ameen. Jazakallah khair for joining us, brothers and sisters, whether you are here in person or watching the live broadcast. We are on session 4 of Surat Al-Nisa, and this is a very important Madani surah, filled with rules and laws and regulations, boundaries, injunctions and ordinances, informing decision making at the level of the family and at the level of the community in that very, very critical stage or phase between the end of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, the truce of Hudaybiyah between the Muslims and Quraysh, all the way until the conquest of Mecca. So roughly speaking, between years 6 and 8 after the migration to Medina. And we said that Surah Al-Nisa is the second longest surah of the Quran, and so by definition it would be the placeholder of a tremendous number of rules, much like Surah Al-Baqarah was, as we've discussed before. And we said that because of the time period and the context of revelation of Surah Al-Nisa, it became clear to us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through this surah wanted to address certain affairs of the Muslim community, lingering challenges of the Muslim family that were not addressed before. In the time of peace that the truce of Hudaybiyah has provided or had provided, became an opportunity to address those social matters that the resolution of which would help the Muslim community evolve into the post-Jahiliyyah phase, right? So there's all of these practices that were super prevalent in pre-Islamic times, and now is the time to nip everything in the bud and make sure that those practices are addressed, and that the Islamic variation of those practices or the Islamic alternative is presented with clarity. Islam obviously came to absorb local cultures and traditions and practices, and not completely remove them. But Islam also operated on principle. Whatever that was in line with divine directives was approved and absorbed and upheld, so to speak. Or if it's matters that do not affect religious discourse, for example, the local administrative systems or customs and traditions that bear no inequity to anyone. On the other hand, practices that were antagonistic to the spirit of Islam were obviously dealt with swiftly. For example, the concept of modesty is what matters. How that modesty is practiced is usually left to the discretion of every local community. And so, the hijab that Middle Eastern women wear may vary greatly from the hijab that African women wear. But at the same time, ultimately, they're both expressions of modesty. They're just culturally nuanced. And so Islam obviously came in order to address those challenges and to address them effectively. And Surah Al-Nisa does that. And this is what we are studying together. And I said that the theme of Surat Al-Nisa was essentially addressing grievances of certain segments of society that did not have enough voice to kind of speak for themselves or to defend themselves or to challenge the status quo. And so Surat Al-Nisa is concerned with advocating for the rights of vulnerable groups. And we've basically stated before that a society or a civilization that does not cater to the needs of its weakest and its most vulnerable is essentially a civilization that does not deserve to survive. Because the power of a civilization is not measured by its ability to fulfill the needs of the powerful, right? That is kind of implied. Rather, its ability to have the systems of self-restraint, the mechanisms of accountability that would basically deliver rights to those who cannot defend themselves and cannot speak for themselves. And we've detailed some of those categories, and we've said, the refugees, people who come, minorities with a different language or a different culture, or, they don't have legal status, and then they're being absorbed into this wider majority community. How this society treats the minority refugees defines its moral character. We've seen before how the Ansar in Medina in general absorbed the Muhajirin of Mecca and treated them with such, not just with justice and tolerance, but treated them with kindness and love and neighborly attitude. And so the treatment of the refugees is a very important and essential part. The treatment of orphans, the treatment of children in general who cannot defend themselves especially the orphans, because the orphans don't have parents that will vouch for them or defend their rights. We talked about the treatment of the mentally disabled, people who may be youth or adults or young people who don't have the mental faculty to again defend themselves. We talked about women in general. We talked about slaves. We talked about prisoners of war. All these are the vulnerable categories of society, and those vulnerable categories need some form of protection or the other, right? And I think in that context, last time we talked about two things. We talked about marriage, and we talked about the permission, on polygamous marriages. We talked about the fact that Islam restricted and not enabled polygamous marriages. It used to be unlimited before Islam, and Islam actually made it a limited process, and it created some safeguards and guidelines, in order for this not to be abused. We also talked about slavery, and I hope that our discussion last time, about taking slaves and sexual relations with slave girls and all of that, I did not mince words about it. I said before that I will never apologize for the spirit of the Deen, and I hope that our conversation, inshallah, was exhaustive enough that it covered at length, those details. In a wider context, I also said last time that Islamic law does not operate very well under the auspices of the modern nation state. Islamic law prefers a political structure that is more decentralized, a political structure that is more localized, a political structure that emphasizes the power of community, the power of local customs and traditions, the power of family, and it also assumes that government helps society grow ethically and to grow morally. There is an education of sorts that take place in order to enhance the internal dynamics of accountability that exist in the human heart, right? And so there are two arrangements here, right, in terms of fighting disorderly conduct or maintaining order in society, right? There's two ways of doing it. Okay, in order to maintain order. One of them is to have very strict laws and to have extremely strict dynamics of law enforcement and go after every single crime and police the streets and look into everything and constantly, probe and prod in order to see who's committing crimes and who's not, and then prosecute them to the maximum extent of the law and overload the prison system, or worse, other punishments that may involve the termination of life, and so on and so forth. This is one way of doing it, and I think the modern nation state has been trying to do that to varying degrees of success, right? And I think there are two things that happened here. Number one is that at least there is a predictability of the law. We know exactly, when to cross the line and how to cross the line and what happens if I cross the line, and the type of punishment, because it's detailed in the penal code. So if you do X, Y, Z, this and that is going to happen to you. On the other hand, I think what we've seen in this particular arrangement is the very high cost of law enforcement, and the fact that when crimes are committed, everyone wants to get away with it. The people can take advantage of the legal system. They will hire the best attorneys. And it just becomes a matter of fighting for procedure, right? Who has better arguments, and who has a more eloquent lawyer, and who has more power and is able to pull more strings. And it's dependent on the jury, and it's dependent on the personality of the judge, and it's dependent on, how the attorney carries themselves and what they're wearing that morning and stuff like that. Sometimes justice becomes, an elusive proposition. In a more complicated way, it also tells us that individuals will break the law if they were not fearful of law enforcement. Like, if I'm not scared of the cops, then what prevents me from breaking the law? This is one arrangement, of maintaining order in society. The other arrangement in maintaining order in society, right, it almost resembles preventive medicine. Right? What do I need to do with the citizens of that society in order to make sure that they don't even think about breaking the law in the first place? Right? What do I need? How do I make breaking the law very costly for people so that it prevents them? Not costly in the sense that I will go to jail, but costly in the sense of the things that I will lose that matter to me. Right? So, if I will lose my family, if I will lose my friends, if I will lose my local support, if the tribal chief is going to be very upset with me, if I cannot marry someone, if I've broken those rules and crossed those boundaries, right? If the local cost of family and community and society is way too high, and I will lose way too much if I broke those rules, then maybe I will think twice before violating the rules. And hand in hand with this also goes the notion of, building someone's moral character. Prevention involves teaching people about God, teaching people about the deen, teaching people about, haqq and batil, right and wrong, or righteous and unrighteous, is for them to actually be convinced that they should avoid breaking the rules because it's not good for them, right? In a situation of lawlessness, people may go to Best Buy in order to steal, 85-inch TV screens or whatever they can find, because why not, right? But in a situation where the motivation for orderly conduct comes from the heart, comes from me realizing that, well, I am Muslim, I cannot take something that is not mine unless I pay for it. I cannot do something that would compromise my akhirah, and if I get caught, I will be shamed for the rest of my life, as a coward thief. I don't want to carry this label with me, right? And so, as you can understand, the Islamic arrangement of law enforcement is very different than the modern nation state, arrangement. The Islamic arrangement emphasizes personal individual responsibility. It emphasizes personal morality. It emphasizes personal accountability, relationship with God, but it also emphasizes parameters that are happening locally. My relationship with my family and my tribe and my local community, and the local cost that I will have to pay if I broke the rules, and I'd be like, what, it's not even worth it. This has nothing to do with the government, or has nothing to do with the cops. It's nothing to do with me going to jail after. It just has everything to do with me paying a way too high a price if I broke those rules, right? So in general, Islamic law thrives in this sort of localized enforcement environment where, communities and families and individuals and mom and dad and brothers and cousins and siblings, right, come together in order to create, these dynamics. But that also, yes, we don't live in those times, or at least in the Western world, We are governed by the pressure of the state, and we're governed by rules and laws and regulations that are very heavily enforced. Well, sometimes selectively enforced when you think about it, depending on who the victim is and who the perpetrator is. But it also tells us something about the power of deterrence, okay? Let's say that we're not talking about crimes. We're talking about, we're talking about unethical conduct. We're talking about mischievous conduct. Like if as a parent, for example, if you adopt the philosophy of the modern nation state, then you are the parent that lays down the law, right? I will set the rules for my kids, and if my kids broke those rules, then they will be punished, okay? This parental structure is inspired by the modern nation state and its philosophy, right? But if you really want to follow the Islamic way of preventing, crime or preventing disorderly behavior or unbecoming behavior on the part of the children, then you want to veer to the Islamic philosophy, which is, what am I doing in order to instill proper values in the hearts of my children so that they don't even think about breaking those laws in the first place? And if they did, it would be like minor violations here and there that won't be such a big deal. So I'm not fighting with my kids. Like, for example, parents who are concerned that their kids may drink or may sleep around or may do drugs, okay? So it becomes what? It becomes a matter of what type of enforcement am I putting in place? So I have to monitor their behavior, and I have to put location tracking on their phone, and I have to show up at this party, and I have to prevent this from happening. You and I know that this stuff doesn't work very effectively. What works effectively is for your son or your daughter to know in their heart that they don't want to do those things. And then there is trust between us. So instead of worrying about how to punish them if they broke the rules, I am concerned about how to educate them so that they don't break those rules in the first place, right? And so this has ramifications, obviously, in the way that we even see ourselves and we raise our children. So taking this back to laws and rules, right? Everything that we will discuss, that we have and we will continue to discuss in Surat Al-Nisa, always assumes the power of the local enforcement, the power of family, the power of tribe, the power of local cultures and customs, and the high cost of violating those boundaries, and that becomes the main deterrent. It always emphasized personal accountability and responsibility, personal morality, personal religious consciousness. I don't want God to be angry with me, therefore I don't want to do those things, right? This can take care of 85% of the process. And that's why penal punishment in Islam, like corporal punishments, are extremely severe. Why? Because it's not assumed that they'll be enforced in the first place. Like when it says, for example, that the punishment for fornication by married people is stoning to death. How many times did this actually happen in Islamic history? Like, some people would say it never happened because the burden of proof is way too high, right? You have to have the 4 witnesses and all of that, and it's nearly impossible to establish. And some say like 5 times, some say 6 times. Like, literally, it's such a small number where people were actually stoned to death as a result of fornication or adultery laws in Islam, okay? And so instead of us spending way too much time defending what the Western mind may perceive as, severe or inhumane or cruel type of punishment, I think you want to take it back to the very philosophy of the penal code in Islam. Why are they even punishments in the first place, and why are those punishments, so severe? Because it's supposed to be a scary deterrent. It's not actually supposed to be applied. We're supposed to go through the entire process of making sure that the person doesn't get there in the first place. And if they did get there, then there is this very complicated process of proving it. If you actually read Islamic law on proving the crime of theft or burglary and the administering of that punishment, you might actually say to yourself, man, this is literally like 99% impossible to even establish or prove, because of all the burdens and the requirements and the difficulties involved in the conviction process, right? And so again, very important for us to understand that the very overall spirit of Islamic law emphasizes personal accountability and responsibility, personal spirituality, personal deterrence, also local dynamics and local boundaries from family and tribe and community and society that would raise the cost of violation so much that it just becomes really like unnecessary for people to break the rules, right? Yes.
Stoning death punishment for fornication is not prescribed in the Quran, though. It's from the supporting arguments are from the Hadith corpus that there was evidence that this happened and Rasulullah did this.
Correct. And the evidence is way too strong to ignore. Like it's at the level of mutawatir, because it was an event that the entire community witnessed, and so there is so many chains of narration, like at least more than 10 that have established that. So that's why there isn't a single scholar that would even dare to ignore that the Prophet ﷺ made a distinction between fornication that occurs between unmarried individuals and acts of adultery, where someone who's married commits an act of fornication. And again, this is almost like a follow-up on what I said last time. If you read this in the context of sexual access that was given to men at the time, it would appear like it's the most unnecessary thing. Like you can marry more than one, and you can take slave girls, and you have all these opportunities. Why would you commit adultery? Like the type of corruption that is involved in the heart of someone who is willing to ignore all the halal ways of doing it, yet commit an act of rape or commit an act of adultery is far too dark that it's absolutely be deserving of such a severe punishment.
But shouldn't a death penalty be something that is prescribed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than humans per se?
What is the difference between what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribes and what the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam prescribes? Because if the Quran says وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَى, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam does not speak of his own whim, and if the Quran commands us to follow what Rasulullah says, then what difference does it make? So whatever injunctions the Prophet ﷺ comes up with are a direct reflection of divine will. At least that is the understanding of mainstream Islam. So we certainly don't make a distinction there. We only make a distinction if there is an alleged hadith that contradicts the letter of the Quran. I think that is because hadith cannot abrogate the Quran. That we cannot allow. Right, but if it further explicates the Quran or adds layers of explanation or qualifies the general sense of some of the ayat, I think that would be well within the accepted range. So with that, I want to go to ayah number 10, because that's what we're on right now. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَأْكُلُونَ أَمْوَالَ الْيَتَامَى ظُلْمًا إِنَّمَا يَأْكُلُونَ فِي بُطُونِهِمْ نَارًا وَسَيَصْلَوْنَ سَعِيرًا. Those who wrongfully devour the property of the orphans, surely they only swallow fire into their bellies, and they shall enter a burning fire. So I want you to imagine, the word yatama here is plural for yatim, and yatim is orphan, right? And so the ayah says that those who take the wealth of the orphans unjustly, and we've detailed the just guidelines before in the last couple of sessions, and what it would mean, what type of justified expenses that are derived from the wealth of the orphans. But if you take the wealth of the orphans unjustly, then essentially what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is saying, it's as if you've devoured fire. And so you experience a complete lack of barakah, because this fire burns all the blessings in your life. It will burn through your mental health. It'll burn through your self-confidence. It'll burn through your worldly success. But in the afterlife, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that you will experience the literal type of burning when you go into hellfire. The Prophet ﷺ, if you guys remember, in the journey of Isra and Mi'raj, there is this hadith where Rasulullah ﷺ says that he saw in hellfire people who have lips that resembled the lips of camels. You know how rough and ugly the lips of camels are, right? No offense to the camels, right? And so رأيت قوما لهم مشافر كمشافر الإبل. I've seen people that have very ugly looking, rough lips like the lips of camels. وقد وكل بهم من يأخذ بمشافرهم. And some angels are given the charge of holding their lips. So I want you to imagine there's an angel that is opening your mouth by pulling your lips apart like this. Because they have like this really like meaty lips, right? So they're just pulling the mouth apart by holding the lips like this. ثم يجعل في أفواههم صخرا من نار. And then it places in their mouths like rocks made of fire, essentially like lava, basically. So they are shoving lava in the mouths of those people. يخرج من أسافلهم. So it goes from the mouth lava, and it comes from the bottom lava. So Rasulullah asked Jibreel alayhi salam, Ya Jibreel, what is this? Who are those people? And Jibreel alayhi wa ala nabiyina salatu wasalam said, هم الذين يأكلون أموال اليتامى ظلما. Those are the people that unrightfully or unjustly usurp or devour the wealth of the orphans. And again, orphans here is just is emblematic of all the vulnerable groups in society. Because what applies to the orphans will apply to anybody else. So if you go to, let's say, someone who's disabled, someone who's blind, and you go into that person's house, and then you steal something from that person's house, and that person is not able to defend themselves. I mean, stealing something is bad in general, but stealing something from someone that cannot defend themselves is a far worse offense. Wouldn't you agree? Right? Because the level of injustice involved is just so heinous. At least when you pickpockets or whatever, you go on public transportation, it's still haram, but the people still have a fighting chance. But when you steal something from a person who cannot defend themselves, that makes it that much worse. And so أكل مال اليتيم, devouring the wealth of the yatim, of the orphans, is actually one of the 7 destructive sins in Islam. What are the 7, like the 7 worst sins that are utterly devastating and destructive? Anyone wants to guess? Yes, murder, when you take an innocent soul without any justification. Not every form of killing is murder, right? You may kill the enemy in battle or the execution of a criminal. These are forms of killing, right? But certainly murder when you take an innocent soul. What else? Shirk, absolutely. When you associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then what? Gambling is bad, but it's actually not on this list. Yeah, it's still one of the major sins. But these are the major of the major, the worst of the worst, the top of the top. Zina is not on that list either. It's not one of the 7. It's still a kabira. It's still a major sin, but it's not one of those, right? Murder, shirk, sihr. People who engage in witchcraft, right? People who sell their soul to the devil, in order to harm or hurt others, right? Riba. Why is the indulgence in usury, like profiting, off of others? Because it has far-reaching consequences for the entire society. At least zina is a violation that takes place between 2 consenting individuals, right? And it stays between them. It has its own corruption, and it's also a sin of passion. It's a sin of weakness, right? It does not even compare to the calculating nature of riba or the calculating nature of witchcraft, right? These are different levels, of destruction, right? Akl mal al-yatim, obviously, devouring the wealth of the orphan. What else? So that's 4. No, riba is a sin, but it's not one of the 7 most destructive sins. Don't get us into the rabbit hole of mortgage and all that.
So riba, and I'm focusing on interest. Is it equally part of that 7? Is it equally for a person paying or the person receiving?
It's not equal, of course. The person who profits off of riba and the person who finds himself or herself in a situation where they have to pay riba in order to survive, لا يستويان. They are not the same, right? You being victimized by riba because you don't have a choice, and you being on the profiting end of riba, that's very different. So my son was asking me the other day, and he's asking me, he says, there's this business opportunity, but my heart told me that, maybe it's haram. I was like, yeah, it probably is. You're not going to think that. You're not going to have this conversation with me unless you actually think it is. So I said, what is it? He said, these people who, live in maybe like older homes and they're elderly and they're not able to pay taxes. So, maybe you own $5,000, $7,000, $10,000 to the county, in back taxes. And now the county has one of two things. They either basically foreclose, or maybe they will sell the note, because now there is some kind of lien on the property. So they might sell a depreciated note to investors. So, it's the county is owed $10,000, and so they might sell it to you for $7,000. And so now you take a $7,000 note, and now you're the note holder, you're the lien holder on that property, right? And you're charging the owner's interest every month, and after a certain number of months, whatever, 6 months or a year, you can actually foreclose in order to get your money, and basically, put those people on the street. So I told him, if there is a textbook definition of riba, it would be this, right? Because you're literally taking advantage of people's poverty, and you're trying to exploit them, and you're lending them money, hoping that they won't pay you so that you continue to profit off of them. Right? So you can see the severe nature, obviously, of something like this. التولي يوم الزحف, desertion in a time of war. Okay? When your comrades depend on you and your presence, and that you're going to be doing your job in the battlefield, and you basically walk away, you desert, right? That puts everyone else's life in danger, and the life of the entire community and the ummah, and opens us up to the enemy. Then obviously this is far beyond just being a major sin, right? And the last one is قذف المحصنات. When you falsely accuse chaste women of fornication or adult, I want you to imagine this. False accusation of fornication is a far worse crime than fornication itself in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How incredible is that? Because again, fornication is between two individuals, they bear the consequences, it's kabira, it's a major sin, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala angry for sure, right? But what is worse than that is to lie in order to hurt someone and destroy their reputation and say horrific things about them that are not true. The far-reaching consequences of that in society, is utterly horrendous. So remember, what I said before is that Sharia does not prefer to operate under the structures of the modern nation state and its emphasis on law enforcement. Rather, Sharia prefers this sort of local, decentralized system of accountability, pressure from family, pressure from tribe, pressure from community, pressure from local custom. And by the way, this can very effectively inform our decisions as we move forward with our lives and as we raise our children. America is designed to cut us up into small pieces because this is a more effective way to control. Right? So, naturally, when kids reach the age of 18, they are expected to leave the house. They're expected to work. They're expected to rent their own apartment, to have their own girlfriends, to go to college somewhere else and work on the East Coast, whatever. That has become the expectation, right? And an individual that lives by himself or herself, or maybe just has a girlfriend, no other attachments, is a better gear for the engine of capitalism. Why? Because Meta wants you to show up at 6 in the morning and spend the next 17 hours at work. And that's why they'll have the best food, they'll have the best cafeterias, they have a quiet room, you'll have your massage parlor, you'll have everything that you need, you have your gym, you have your entertainment, because they want you to stay there for as long as possible. If you have a wife, if you have children, if you have a family, if you have mom and dad and cousins and other attachments and masjid, then you're giving me the bare minimum, and we don't like that. All right? And so as we prepare our children for adulthood, and if I understand that Islamic law and the efficiency of Islamic law and Islamic morality operates best in larger, more accountable family structures, and emphasis on local pressure, then sometimes I need to generate that local pressure by keeping the family together. Right? And so if I have a chance to live close to mom and dad or cousins or aunts and uncles versus moving to Springfield, Idaho, I don't know if there's a Springfield in Idaho, but moving to another state where there is less people, less Muslim community, definitely less family, but a lot higher pay, then essentially if I understand what's going on over here, I need to say no to that. And I need to stay close, because that is better for me and better for the morality of my children. But the flip side of the coin is that if my kids came and say, oh, Dad, I would like to go to NYU, I was like, why is that? What's so amazing about NYU that we don't have here locally? Well, it's an amazing school and it's so awesome and it's the middle of this an urban city. I was like, no, I'm sure people who live in New York say the same thing about UC Davis. There's a kid over there in Queens right now telling their parents, oh, Dad, I want to go to UC Davis. It's so awesome. Why would you want to go to UC Davis? It's just all the way far in California. Well, it's just such a great school, close to this beautiful city that's called Sacramento, and Tarbiyah is over there. Right? It's the same thing. It's the same bad idea. It's the same horrible idea. Why can't the people in Queens and Brooklyn stay in Queens and Brooklyn, and the people in Sacramento stay in Sacramento? Send your kids to local schools. It's all just an illusion. It's just a big lie. Ivy League, all that, it's just a big lie, right? It really means nothing in the end. It's just a stupid piece of paper that you're going to slap on the wall. What's going to define your success is who you are and what you do, is your network, is your stability, is your mental health, is your relationship with God. This is what's going to define your happiness and your fulfillment, right? It's not, the fact that I have this degree from this place and that degree from that place. I always advise parents, don't send your kids away. And if you absolutely have to, because there was no local opportunities, then 3-4 years college, come back, live with the family, get married here, send roots, so that your kids will have cousins and aunts and this and that, and everyone lives within like a 45-minute drive. Then you're creating the local circumstances that will keep everyone at bay, that will keep everyone under control, right? So that we don't have to watch our kids suffer and go through horrific circumstances of life and very high divorce rates and a pervasive mental health epidemic. Why is this happening? Because people don't have this support system that, again, keeps them all together. The pieces need this outside pressure in order to continue to gravitate to one another. So we need family, we need tribe, we need local community, we need masjid, we need society, we need local culture. Local culture matters so much. It's a culture that does not allow for foul language, a culture that looks down upon bad music, a culture that looks down upon flirtatious relationships. It's a culture that emphasizes the necessity of coming to Jum'ah. Like, this is a family culture, right? I am not just talking about halal and haram. I'm talking about family expectations, right? What do we and so if dad is always missing Jum'ah because work is really, really important, you're inadvertently teaching the children that Jum'ah is not important. And this is subject to my whims and subject to my life and subject to what I'm going through. If it's convenient, I'll do it. If it's not convenient, I'll skip it. It's not a big deal. Because being at work is always the illegitimate excuse. Dad does it. Why can't I? Right? And so building a family or a community culture that deters bad behavior, right? And this way we lower the cost of enforcement as much as possible. And this is what Surat Al-Nisa wants to achieve. And with that in mind, I want us to now start talking about inheritance. And the conversation starts in ayah number 11, I think 12 as well. 11 and 12. And then at the very end of the surah, there will be a further conversation on inheritance as well. All right, so a few things to keep in mind, inshallah ta'ala, before we even get into the inheritance conversation. I mean, we've dealt with all kinds of interesting controversies in Surah Al-Nisa thus far, right? We talked about polygamy and multiple marriages. We talked about slavery and slave girls and having sex with slave girls, right? We talked about, inshallah ta'ala, we talk about inheritance today. We will still talk about, the ayah that talks about it's permissible for a man to beat his wife. We're going to address all of that in Surah Al-Nisa. Because, this is the surah of managing these controversies, because you have to learn how to deal with the vulnerable segments of society. So these are things that we need to keep in mind before we even get into the discussion on inheritance, right? Number one, who does wealth belong to? Does it belong to the deceased? It doesn't belong to anyone. Wealth belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So who gets to decide how wealth is distributed? You? The United States federal government? You can only decide with regard to the things that you own. But if it's not yours in the first place, then who gets to decide? The owner. And who is the owner? It is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is a divine prerogative. This is the right of God to decide how wealth in His own world is distributed. And it's funny because people will let the American government and American laws decide on how wealth is distributed. No one complains when the husband dies, who gets all the wealth? The wife. Wait a second. Why are the kids not complaining that their mom got all the wealth? Why are the parents not complaining that their daughter-in-law got all the wealth? Why are we only complaining when the distribution does not fit our preferences when it comes to Islamic law? At least Islamic law assigns something to everyone in proportions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saw fit. American law excludes entire people from the equation, 100%. Which one is more equitable? That I give something or I give nothing at all? There are situations where fathers who really had their kids work with them in their companies and built their companies with them, and I know a particular person, by the way, a Muslim guy who did this, and I've known him for like 15 years, right? And then when he was close to his death, he actually wrote his entire wealth to some kind of random charitable organization. And he denied all of his kids the right to inherit it because he got upset with them towards the end of his life, and he has, this sort of like, severe dementia, and they are fighting and they're upset, and he got upset with them, so he just like, excluded them from the wasiyah, from the will completely. Even though, again, his 3 sons contributed to the building of his company that became like a multi-million-dollar company. But when their father died, they got absolutely nothing. And they lost their jobs, so now they have to start from scratch in their 50s. Okay? And so we seem to be okay with this because it's coming from secular law. But we're not okay when it comes, why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving men more than women? Yeah, in one particular case He is, but maybe we need to examine all the other cases and see why. So number one, wealth belongs to Allah, and the one that owns the wealth has every right to distribute that wealth the way He wants, right? Number two, inheritance is rizq, is it not? Inheritance is rizq. I may or may not get it, because we don't know who's going to die first. It's always assumed, the kids are going to inherit from the father. But Islamic law is more realistic than this. Islamic law has also rules for what happens when the kids die before the parents. Who gets the wealth? Because we have no idea. And so it's precisely because we don't know who's going to die first that it is a rizq in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we usually don't make a fuss about rizq, right? Like if there's 2 brothers, went through life in the same exact way, went through the same schools, raised by the same exact parents, graduated from the same program, but then one of them became a millionaire and the other one is struggling. Do we look at this and say, oh man, this is messed up, this is unfair? Or do we say, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yuqassimu al-arzaq, He is the one that distributes the rizq. Right? It's the will of Allah. And so inheritance is also a form of rizq, and therefore we should let al-razzaq subhanahu wa ta'ala to decide on how this wealth is distributed. Number 3, the distribution of inheritance in Islam follows rules of equity, not rules of equality. And rules of equity means that people, not based on merit, but based on need, they will get. The wealth is supposed to help you achieve your role and your function in life. And so you will get a share based on the expectations that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has of you and how your wealth is going to be spent. Number 4, the Arabs in ancient times in general, by the way, not just like most of these cultures that were contemporaneous with the Arabs, they had zero rules of inheritance. The only one that got an inheritance was the sons that were adults and were able to ride and they were able to fight in battles. Because they were strong enough to defend themselves. Girls got nothing, wives got nothing, mothers and most likely elderly fathers got nothing, and certainly younger sons who are not of the age of fighting or soldiery, they did not get anything either. So as much as some modern people criticize the rules of Islamic inheritance, they were absolutely revolutionary at the time when they came down. In fact, the Arabs were so angry that women even got something. And they would talk to each other, you know what, let's not bring it up. Perhaps Rasulullah is going to forget about what he said. The Sahaba, the Ansar, they were so upset with the rules of Surat Al-Nisa. And they would refrain from asking the Prophet ﷺ for details or to ask him what he meant by the hadith when he explained it. لَعَلَّ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ أَنْ يَنْسَى. Perhaps the Messenger of God is going to forget what he said, so we don't have to deal with this. And then when he didn't forget, obviously they would go and talk to him and argue with him. Ya Rasulullah, how could we possibly give wealth to our daughters when they can't ride and they can't fight, and they can't defend the family and they can't defend the community? Which is not an entirely bad argument, by the way. But again, it assumes that the only meaningful reason for someone to get inheritance is their ability to fight and defend the family, which is an important thing, but it's not the only thing, right? There are other things as well that would make a son or a daughter or an heir deserving of inheritance. Number 5, in the wider economic context, the man has way or far larger financial responsibilities than a woman, right? Again, remember, we're not talking about the American context here. We're talking about a decentralized, system that does not necessarily resemble the modern nation state, where there's a lot of emphasis on local customs and local traditions and family and community and so on and so forth. In that context, we're not talking about the context where, sons abandon their families and they go live in New York by themselves, and their parents are on government support, right? Barely living through their social security. Not these types of quasi-men. We're talking about men who actually follow the responsibilities of Islamic law. A man is responsible, religiously responsible, not just responsible, but Islamically responsible to support his wife. Whether his wife works or not, that's completely irrelevant. Imam, but she makes more than me. Yeah, still irrelevant. You're still responsible. Her money is hers. She can spend her money however way she wants, right? Now, there is an arrangement, by the way, where, the wife can also become the leader of the family, and that's fine too, if you're okay with that. But you don't call the shots anymore, because every family needs a leader. But if you want to stay as a leader of your family, as a man, then you have to be the financially responsible party. In addition to that, it is the man's religious responsibility to take care of the children. It's not the wife. It's the man's religious responsibility to take care of his mom and his dad at their older age. It is his religious responsibility to take care of his unmarried sisters, right? It is his religious responsibility to pay zakah for the family. It is his religious responsibility to do udhiyah, on Eid al-Adha, and so on and so forth. All these financial responsibilities rest in the hands of the man. And so, in the event that the father passed away and the man is getting a little bit more wealth than his sister, in this context, it would make perfect sense because the obligations that this man has far outweigh the obligations of his sister. So if you read Islamic law independent of its context, it may, to your postmodern ear, it may sound inequitable, right? Sure, but this it's not equal, but it is certainly equitable, okay? Based on the responsibilities. So with that in mind, we read ayah number 11 together. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يُوصِيكُمُ اللَّهُ فِي أَوْلَادِكُمْ لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ. Allah exhorts you or admonishes you or He enjoins upon you concerning your children. The son will have 2 shares and the daughter will have 1 share, right? So this is the very first one that is established because it's the most immediate relationship, and the most important relationship is that of child and parent, all right? And so if a parent dies and the parent left a mix of boys and girls, then basically the boy will get double of what the girl gets, right? And it details all of the other rules, by the way, in the rest of this ayah, and I will summarize some of them for you here. So the boy will get double, right? 2 shares, and the girl will get 1 share, right? Parents will get 1/6 each, right? If the person who died is the husband, then his wife will get 1/8, and if the person who died is the wife, then the husband will get 1/4. Right? Again, still in line with the double amount. Brothers and sisters, uncles, grandparents, and the extended relatives don't get except in special cases when direct heirs are not present, right? Now, if the deceased person only left daughters, right? So they get, if it's 1 daughter, she gets 1/2, and the rest is distributed to the parents and the grandparents or whatever. And if he left more than 1 daughter, then they will both get a total of 2/3, and 1/3 will be distributed, to everyone else. I don't expect you to memorize any of this, but they have very effective inheritance calculators now, on the internet that follow the strict guidelines of Islamic law. So it's almost like a questionnaire. It'll ask you a question, it'll survey your situation, it'll ask you about how much wealth you have and everything, or if someone passed away, you're going to say, oh, my dad passed away and he left all of this behind, and then the system will ask you, is your mom still alive? How many children? How many brothers? How many sisters? How many uncles? How many this? How many that? And then it'll tell you in the end how much every single one of them is supposed to get, right? So this is very effective, but the surah, obviously details the ground rules here. So if he leaves 1 daughter, she gets 1/2, and if he leaves more than 1 daughter, they both collectively get 2/3. As for parents, if he has children, the parents will get 1/6 each, right? And if the parents are the only heirs, right? So the mother will get 1/3. And if there is a surviving spouse, like I said earlier, he takes half. But if she dies, if the husband dies, she gets, and they don't have any children, she gets 1/4. And if she dies, he gets 1/2. And there are rules, about every situation, pretty much. And there is one extra rule that I wanted to mention here, and I will talk about the kalala in just 1 second. But the ayah here also says, "Min ba'di wasiyatin yusi biha aw dayn." After the debt is paid off, and after the wasiyah, the will is delivered. Okay. So I want you to think of this situation, right? There is someone that left behind $100,000. Someone that left behind $100,000, right? And so this person has parents, this person has a spouse, this person has children, all right? But it turns out that this person also owed $25,000 to someone, because of business or whatever. And it also turns out that this person had in his will like $10,000 to my masjid in the event of my death, right? So 25,000 needs to be removed from the inheritance. So the inheritance is not $100,000 in this case. It's how much? It's 75. So we're dividing 75, not 100, because it's like the bank. It's the bank lien. The first lien holder. The bank gets their money first in the event of a foreclosure. So in the event of death, debt has to be paid off, first, and that is the absolute responsibility of the heirs. So you cannot say, hey, we'll distribute the money and then each one of us will give their share of the debt. You cannot do that. That's haram. That would be very problematic for you and very problematic for the deceased. All right? So the portion of the debt has to be paid off first. And then now I have 75,000. Out of the 75,000, there is $10,000 that person willed to go to the masjid. As long as the amount of will is less than 1/3 of the entire wealth, then it's okay. If the deceased willed more than 1/3, then you don't have to follow that article. You can actually say, no, we will only give up to 1/3, because you are not allowed in Islamic law to will more than 1/3. Now, so again, it's in this order. It's in this order. You pay the debt first, and then you deliver the will. And then after that, whatever that remains is distributed. So in this particular example, the amount of wealth is actually $65,000, not 75, certainly not 100, right? Here's the question though, because people ask, okay, can I put my daughter in the will? She's not in the will. Your daughter is a natural heir. Yeah, I don't have to put my natural heirs in the will because Islamic law kicks in. Everyone knows exactly what they're supposed to get. I don't have to write it down. So I don't need to say, my wife is going to get 1/8 and my dad is going to get 1/6. I don't need to say that.
But if somebody wants to give, like from the 1/3 that you can give to anybody, you can put...
Except your natural heirs. Except your natural heirs. Otherwise, and by the way, just in the interest of full academic disclosure, this is like, let's say, 95% of scholarship across the madhahib, including the Shia madhahib as well, right? That the scholars said that this does not include your natural heirs. Because if it included your natural heirs, then it just becomes, sort of a disingenuous way of getting around the rules, right? There's a small minority of the scholars that would include natural heirs in the will writing, and I think it just doesn't make sense. Because if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sets the rule and then He tells us how to violate that rule, that would be weird. Like that would not make any sense. But the 1/3 here applies to maybe relatives that would not have inherited, right? Or maybe like a cousin who is going through really difficult financial problems and I want my cousin to get something, right? Or an adopted child. Like an orphan child that was raised in my household and, because they're not my blood kid, they cannot inherit from me, so I can dedicate something to them. Or the masjid, or Palestine, or something. Like I can dedicate, in my will, a portion of that up to 1/3 total, to someone or something that is not my natural heir, right? Half siblings are coming up. Because half siblings are only natural heirs in specific situations when all the other heirs are not there, right? So when you don't have children and you don't have a spouse, but you have, for example, a half brother on your mother's side, then they will get something, in I think it's 1/6 total or something like this. It's actually in 1/8. This is in ayah number 12. The next one talks about this. This is hukmul kalala. Yes. Say again? Yeah, so stepfather, stepmother, they're not natural heirs. Like under no circumstance do they actually inherit from you. So you can include them in the will. Because they're not natural heirs. Yeah. So the will part is designed to make the process of distribution even more equitable. Because it gives you discretion to give some of your wealth to people that would have naturally not inherited from you. Does that make sense?
Imam, just one more clarification question. The ruling that you're explaining, is it limited to like Maliki, Shafi, or Hanafi? Or
Minor differences between the madhahib on this.
overall,
minor differences. Yeah. Overall, this would apply, to most. But what I'm describing to you tonight is mostly the Hanafi perspective, because this is just what was detailed in Ibn Kathir. But it's not different. It's not very different. Very minor differences with the other madhahib. Yes?
When you say in your will, if you have a daughter and son, you cannot say, I want them to get an equal share. That will be violating the rule.
Not only that it would be violating the rule, it would actually be considered a kabira. Like, this is a major sin. Why? Because this is someone who basically is saying to God, your system is unjust, so I need to correct it myself. Okay? And I will get to that, by the way. And I will talk about practical situations where your son is a drug dealer, but your daughter is a saint. Right? Because I think that's usually what occurs to people. I've had a brother whose son used to send him, I don't want to share something graphic with you guys, but used to send him extremely graphic pictures of things that he's doing just to bother his father. He was that far gone. And then his dad would ask me, how can I give any money to this person? And deep in my heart, I can't help but say, you cannot absolve yourself completely from your responsibility. He's still your kid. Absolutely. You must have done or haven't done something that may have led to this. And of course, I'm not saying it's all on the father or the mother. There's a million factors, right? But I don't think that we as parents can completely exonerate ourselves from responsibility, like 100%. I must have done something that makes me even at least in part responsible for what happens to my children. Like, there's no way that I did everything by the book and just my kids, they just failed. It's just, there's no way, right? But I didn't say that to him. I still gave him a solution that does not violate Islamic law. And I'll get to that, inshallah, right? And then, if we continue in ayah number 12, it says, وَلَكُمْ نِصْفُ مَا تَرَكَ أَزْوَاجُكُمْ, right? Men will inherit half of what their wives leave behind if they don't have any children, right? إِن لَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُنَّ وَلَدٍ, if the mothers did not have any children, either from her husband or from a previous marriage, right? فَإِن كَانَ لَهُنَّ وَلَدٍ فَلَكُمُ الرُّبُعُ مِمَّا تَرَكْ. Now, if it turns out that the mother has a child, either your child or her child from a previous relationship, then you get 1/4 and not 1/2. مِن بَعْدِ وَصِيَّةٍ يُوصِينَ بِهَا أَوْ دَيْنٍ. Again, after the debt is paid off and after the will is delivered, right? And as far as the women, if the husband dies, وَلَهُنَّ الرُّبُعُ مِمَّا تَرَكْتُمْ. If you die and you don't have any children of your own, then your wife will get 1/4 and the rest goes to the parents or the other heirs. فَإِن كَانَ لَكُمْ وَلَدٍ فَلَهُنَّ الثُّلُثُ مِمَّا تَرَكْتُمْ. If you have a child, then your wife will get 1/8, right? مِن بَعْدِ وَصِيَّةٍ يُوصِينَ بِهَا أَوْ دَيْنٍ. وَمِن بَعْدِ وَصِيَّةٍ تُوصُونَ بِهَا أَوْ دَيْنٍ. After the debt is paid off and after the wasiyah is taken care of. And now there is what they call حُكْمُ الْكَلَالَةِ. And حُكْمُ الْكَلَالَةِ is basically when you don't have any of those natural heirs, right? What happens when I don't have... All I have left is like brothers and sisters or uncles or half-brothers, right? Or grandparents, like there is no children or spouse or parents that would... Because again, inheritance in Islam is focused on immediate blood relationships, right? It's either your children or your parents. Your brothers and sisters naturally don't inherit, except in the absence of the natural heirs. And in the absence of your brothers and sisters, then your half-brothers and sisters, would inherit as well from your mother's side. Because your brothers and sisters from your father's side, the rules would still apply to them. So if you have half-brothers or sisters from your mother's side, each one will get 1/6. And they get that equally. By the way, Dr. Salah Sultan has this incredible book where he talks about the amounts of inheritance. I think he details like 24 cases. In 4 of those cases, men get more than women. In 8 of those cases, women get more than men. And in the rest of the cases, they get equal amounts. The one that is often emphasized is usually the father-son or daughter relationship. right?
Mom, can the non-heirs be gifted anything during
Can what?
lifetime? The
I will get to that.
Okay.
I know that's everyone's salvation.
You know, one thing I wanted to kind of mention, some of the brothers here, closer I come, they probably closely understand this, but you know how all these rules are majority like they're kind of influenced and overtaken by our tradition sometimes. So when it comes to the one point you made earlier, like, okay, the person left all this wealth or money, whatever behind, but at the same time they have a debt, like 25,000 mentioned.
Mm.
So across the board, we have a very sad tradition. I just don't know what your view of that would be, but right before the body is buried, we call it Scott. I don't know, Scott or Scott? I don't even know how to spell it.
Okay.
But basically, before the body is buried, a bunch of 5 or 7 men sit in a circle, and the family puts the money in a bag or something, and then they goes around and says, I received it and I forgive it. I give it to the next person. This money is like a little game they play, and the money goes around 7 people, and they hand it back to the family saying, okay, all his debts are, like, debt that he must have had that we are not aware of.
Oh, interesting. So those people are not actually like debtors.
Yeah, they're not. They're taking...
Like it's just a
Afghani-
performative thing?
They take 50 Afghani per person to volunteer. It's not volunteer, it's paid position, basically. Like on the graveyard, they sit down, they get 50 Afghani.
No one is expected to take the money.
They're not expected to take, but
What if it's just like one jerk says, yeah, I take the money?
they are saying that's possibility. That's
Ah.
what they get paid.
I see.
50 Afghani per person, 7 of them sit. I mean, the brothers, some of them might know even more than me because that's a big tradition of us.
Huh.
Very minor people.
So I understand the spirit of wanting to make sure that the debts of the deceased are paid off.
Yeah.
I just don't understand the performative nature of it. Like,
Yeah, so that's
it needs to be genuine. Like, we literally have to be genuine about this.
it's cultural, and I don't understand.
You know, I remember when my dad passed away, and my dad was a business owner, and he had like companies and stuff like that. So obviously he owed some money, not because he wasn't able to pay it. It's just, you know, there's like accounts receivable, and there are just ongoing things. And you know, I had an uncle who also passed away, alayhi rahmatullah. You know, he was really loved my dad so much, and he was like, you know, really like under the influence of sadness and anger, that for months, you know, people who would come to him and say, you know, Hajj Ahmed owed me this amount, and he would say, you know where his grave is, go ask him. And he would refuse to pay people back because he's just like so angry that his brother died. And then, you know, I wasn't involved in the business, and my brother was, and we would go and ask him, dude, you know, you can't do that. You know, my dad is not going to be delivered on the day of judgment until the debts are paid off. There's like multiple ahadith. There is nothing that you do, like no ibadah, no hajj and umrah, no sadaqah, nothing that you can do in this life that will pay off your debt. There's an amount that has to be paid, then it has to be paid. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck until it's paid off. And so for the longest time, he wouldn't, until he eventually did. So unfortunately, in many of the Middle Eastern cultures, the debt sort of dies with the person, you know, that owed it. And that's unfair, and it's haram. Even if it's not written, even if it was verbal, even if there's no evidence, you have, and that's why I keep emphasizing personal accountability and responsibility and personal piety, because this is what's going to get you to do the right thing. In the absence of laws and rules and enforcement, you still want to do the right thing because you don't want the deceased to suffer because you're just being stubborn, right? So I don't get the performative part about this. You know, I don't understand that part. But you know, these are local cultural practices. You know, it's almost like a deformation of what the Islam actually says, and I don't know if that's appropriate. Yeah. Yes.
The question is, the father has 4 children. Now, one of the child, he dies first, and then the father dies.
So the father has 4 children. Boys or girls?
4 boys.
4 boys. Okay.
So one son dies while the father is alive, and then the father also dies a few years later. children of the son, they don't get any share. The 3 living sons, they will get the share, but not the child in the Sharia. Why is that?
Yeah, that, by the way, that is literally our culture.
Why are they waiting till
This
like
is
the
the
father
Sunni
dies?
Sharia.
So can you explain this a little bit further to me? Yeah.
Let's start again.
Yes.
Father had 4 children.
Right.
Now the father is alive, but one son died.
Right.
After a few years, the father also died.
So who inherited the son in that case?
Now there are 3 sons.
No. The fourth son that died. What happened to the son?
He died, but he has 2
But
children also.
but the son has wealth.
The father had the will. The father was the owner of all the property. It was never in a will or divided among anybody.
Got it. Got it.
Now when the father died and the son died first, then the father died. Now there are 3 sons and the grandchildren of the main father. The
Right.
children are not getting anything because the Sharia says the money will be divided between the 3 sons, not the kids.
Not the grandchildren. Not the grandkids. Yes.
To full circle with what it
So there's a lot of fight going on in my country where this case is concerned. That they could,
Correct.
The Sharia says no, you can.
Yeah. So again, who dies and who survives, that's the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And who dies when, that is also the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And who gets how much, that is the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even if I took it at face value as it is, I would say it wasn't meant to be for the grandchildren to inherit. It's not the rizq. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not want them to get that. They have to pursue opportunity elsewhere, right? And I'm perfectly content with this scenario, by the way, where the grandchildren got nothing. I'm perfectly content with that. Now, because it may be perceived as unfair to some scholars actually made it where those 2 grandchildren can be willed something because they're not natural heirs. So the grandfather can actually include them in his will, voluntarily. If he wanted to do that, then it would be advisable for him to do that, in order to protect the hearts from malice and anger and hatred and so forth. But it is the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they don't get a piece.
But then here we are giving money to the stepchildren and the stepdaughters or whoever the scenario has 1/6 or 1/5. But here they are the actual heirs of the son who died.
But they're not the actual heirs. Because the line was interrupted when their father died.
Like their dad didn't have wealth in his name.
And their dad did not own anything of his own. So they're not natural heirs to the grandfather. Right? Not in Islamic law, not in Western law either, by the way. They will get absolutely nothing in either case. Unless someone in the family, and this is obviously advised, someone in the family includes that in the will, I think that would be appropriate. And so maybe if you would give advice to your countrymen, that's what you want to say to them. That the grandfather needs to include them voluntarily in his will. I'm sorry, there was a hand there? Yes.
I was just saying the reason why I was kind of interested in this is because that scenario that brother was saying, I'm literally that grandchild, and it literally happened. Not that my grandfather had a home.
You are the one that was excluded from the...
Yes.
See, Allah blessed you and then you came to America.
I'm saying it wasn't like much to start with, but they literally, like my uncle, everybody got it, but we didn't.
And the rest of the heirs, are they still in Afghanistan?
Yeah, there are. Some of them are still in Afghanistan.
But see, that's exactly my point, is that, rizq is distributed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala one way or the other. It wasn't your rizq for you to get particular wealth from the inheritance, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala compensated you through different ways, and here we are.
So deceased son children don't get anything. The deceased son children,
Yeah, because they don't inherit from their grandfather.
they don't inherit.
Mm-mm.
But only if the grandfather is alive. If his child died before the father.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Mhm. Yes, inheritance laws are complicated. Yeah, because they involve so many different scenarios, so many different relationships, who dies before the other, and so on and so forth. And so there's these interesting charts. By the way, I've done this exercise a few years ago. If you want to go like on AI, like on Claude or Gemini or whatever, and actually ask for a full comprehensive chart of Islamic inheritance with all the relationships, all the shares, and all the scenarios of who dies first, it'll actually be pretty cool and comprehensive. But you just send it to me to verify that it's actually 100% accurate, and you can go off of that. It's pretty cool. I've done it before.
I
Yes.
have one clarification question.
Yes.
The question is that there's a lot of accusations on the inheritance law because they say that the summation of all the fractions does not become a whole. Have you heard of that? Like the summation of all the fractions is more than 100%. So there is a flaw in the fractions, and therefore
I would need someone to show it to me, just so that I'm able to. Like, it sounds hypothetical to me. Like, I did not do the math myself.
So, Ma'am, let's say if there's a brother and a sister, so sorry, a father has a son and a daughter, and then there's like, he has a wife, and then, I mean, you start by dissecting, let's say, if you do, let's say if there's $100,000, you divide it between between the daughter and the son, and then the wife. Does she get 1/6 of the remain of the original, or you see? So sorry. Let me explain.
So I know what you're trying to ask. Okay, so let's say that I have $100,000. Okay, and I have mom and dad, and I have my wife, and I have one son and one daughter. Okay, who gets first? Who gets first? Who's entitled to get first? Your son and daughter.
But then 1/3 and 2/3 becomes whole. Then what does the wife get, or the mother get?
Yeah, so they get a percentage of what remains.
1/3 and 2/3 is gone, right? 1/3 is given.
No. Your son and daughter. So here's how you want to do it. You want to put your son, your daughter, your spouse, your mom, and your dad in terms of shares. And this is how you divide it up mathematically. 3 shares, 1 share, 0.5 share, and so on and so forth.
You don't divide the remaining. At the beginning, you put all.
You don't divide the remaining. You have to count the number of people and their prospective shares, and then distribute accordingly. I think this is how the math adds up. But if you make it where, let's give my wife 1/8 and then start distributing the rest, that's when it's going to get dicey. So this is not how the calculation is made. The calculation is made in shares.
Like, oh my God, no, it's not like you give somebody and then you divide the rest on. It's all of the same calculation.
Correct.
Let's keep it simple. Let's say it's $10,000. Son, daughter, and mother. How do you divide it?
Let's go to the online calculator and have the calculator do that for us. Don't put me through some complicated algebra equations in the Tafseerah class, please. I am your imam, not your math tutor.
That's the accusation, Imam, that when you add this up, it becomes more than the whole. So
What are you adding exactly?
if you're adding all, for example, parents share, daughters share, sons share, the fractions, the summation of those fractions cannot be more than 100%.
So how is it that we've been distributing inheritance for 1400 years?
No, so it has a whole, like he said, that.
You're taking the total amount and you're distributing it upon the individual heirs as shares.
Then it has to.
One person gets 2 shares, one person gets 1 share, one person gets half a share and 3/4 of a share, and so forth. So the actual amount that the mother is going to get, even though in the calculation she's supposed to be getting 1/8, but maybe in terms of shares it'll be like 2/3 of a share. So it'll translate differently when you do it in the form of shares. Does that make sense? Yes?
So, the case that brother mentioned, so if the grandfather was alive, the son died, the dad was alive, the son died, had the grandfather.
One of the sons died.
Right.
Yeah.
So if the grandfather in his lifetime wanted to distribute, give a certain amount to the deceased son's family, that would have been okay. My point is if a person is alive, that person can give any number of amount of money to anybody, right?
And that was the point that was raised earlier. And let me address this because that's important. So, in your lifetime, you have every right to decide in your wealth however way you want. You want to donate it all to charity, that's up to you. It might make your kids upset, but you have the legal right to do that. You want to write all of your property to one of your kids, you have the right to do that. It's not haram, it's problematic, and the kids are going to hate each other, but it's not haram, okay? So what I said, because again, every man or woman, they are entitled to decide on their wealth, however way they want. That's the very definition of owning the wealth. What I told this brother was, and this is an important solution, because if he doesn't want to dedicate the entire wealth to his daughter while he's still alive. He doesn't like his son and he doesn't want his son to inherit. But he's still, hey, I'm 55 years old. I don't want to give up my land and my company and everything and change the title and put everything under my daughter's name. So what did he do? He created a living trust. And he made himself and his daughter the trustees. And he wrote it in the bylaws of the trust that he is the one that has the full control of decision making in the trust for as long as he's alive. And in the event of his death, his daughter becomes the trustee. So she has the right to, so she did not inherit from him. She was made his co-trustee in his lifetime. Some other people also, what they do is that they create a company, they create an LLC. And they would put themselves and the person that they want to dedicate it to as a member of the LLC. And then, they would make themselves the general manager of the LLC so that they can make all the decisions. But, because the other person is an owner in their lifetime, so it becomes halal for them to get their share in the event of his death. Does that make sense? And this would not be circumventing the rules. This would be you dedicating a property to somebody else in your own lifetime, or dedicating a wealth to somebody else in your own lifetime, which you are entitled to. And so instead of writing in my will, I want my daughter to get everything, or I want my kids to get equal shares, I think if you want one of your kids to get a little bit more because you feel that this particular daughter is having problems or whatever, or she has health issues or something like that, she cannot be independent, and you're not sure if her brothers are going to support her, then again, create a living trust and make her the trustee. And so in the event of your death, the trust will pay her a monthly salary or something like this that will support her for life. This way you did not violate the rules.
But that way, isn't that as soon as, let's say, a person dies, I'm thinking, isn't that where the laws of Sharia should kick in and everything else should be like, whatever? You know what I'm saying?
But when you put some of the wealth in a living trust, then you have changed ownership. You don't own it anymore.
Oh, okay.
The trust owns it.
So it's like,
The trust owns it. I am just a trustee. And so you've removed it from your wealth, essentially. And now the rest is going to be distributed in accordance to Islamic law, but this is not owned by you anymore. This is owned by the trust.
technically, it's not owned by you, but you're in control.
You're in control as much as the CEO is in control of a company. The CEO can make decisions, but does not own the company. It is halal. Yeah. But again, we have to be very careful that this does not become just an open range to, and this is only useful, I think, because we live in these non-Muslim contexts and we're surrounded by a very, very difficult environment where we're not sure if our daughters are going to be cared for. That's a challenge. If you live in a Muslim, and that's why building, that support system is absolutely important, because then you are raising men that will take care of their sisters, right? If in the absence of this, a nuclear family that lives in the middle of nowhere, sometimes dedicating it through a trust might be the way to go to protect the rights.
But somebody can use this just to, there's always a favorite child and always a child that is not like, or not favorite, let's just say that. So isn't that like twisting the rules to take his right away?
It would be haram if that is their intention.
It will be. So you can use it for your benefit as long as you're not taking away somebody's right, right? Am I right?
Let me use an extreme example. Like one of your sons is a psychopathic killer, is a drug dealer. And like far gone. I know this is extreme, right? But let's say that this is, and you feel like, I don't know why I should enable this person by giving them more. And so if I have $100,000 and I took $50,000 and I donated it to the masjid, then my son will still get something, but it's not going to be that much. He's going to get whatever their share in the remaining $50,000 because I donated half of my wealth. So in this particular case, you donated a certain amount of your wealth to the trust. In order to remove that access, because your son is a really bad person and you don't want this son to have access to the... I know what you're saying, and I agree with you, by the way. This is kind of shady.
That's what I'm saying.
It is kind of shady, and it's still slightly problematic. And if we did something like this, we have to be extremely careful.
Doing it intentionally, then we know we are committing
100% haram.
So, yeah.
100% haram. But if I know that I have a child, and I know with great certainty that no one is going to care for my disabled daughter because my sons are absolutely selfish and they are living far in the back east somewhere, and they are not involved in the affairs of the family, and I have not talked to them for years, but then they will come when I die in order to take their share, and I want to make sure that my daughter has something to support her for the rest of her life. Again, you have to consult with the imam on a case-by-case basis, and we have to really, really scrutinize this to make sure that, like, I'm not issuing a fatwa here. I'm not issuing a fatwa, okay? I am saying the letter of Islamic law needs to be observed 100% of the time. If you feel, on a case-by-case basis, that this is a very special situation and I need some advice to decide, then come talk to us and then maybe we'll give you some leeway. But I'm not just saying like do this, at your discretion.
And I think there's also an obvious, situation here where we're kind of not covering it. I know nobody wants to give like all their wealth to somebody, but you can actually give somebody, I think, again, assuming that you're also not making yourself, like giving somebody half your wealth or like a large portion to where your life is going to become difficult. Let's say somebody has 100,000 right now, and they're like, 50, 60 years old. You can give 20,000, just like, hey, this is in your bank.
To your daughter.
Just so I think like we're also just kind of, I know because like, well, I want to have all the money while I'm alive. I think, and again, I'm not saying anybody has to do that, but there's that. If you're that worried about a situation, this is totally halal, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, like, I want to put $20,000 in your name in the bank. It's yours.
It's yours.
While I'm alive.
Khalas.
I mean, obviously you can use it now, but that's not what it's for. I'm here. I'll help you while I'm alive. Leave that alone. But if you wish, obviously, it's yours. I can't tell you not to, right? So there's that out, exit out of this, or like way to address it. That is totally acceptable.
But what is the intention? Is to circumvent the whole system.
If your intention is favoritism, like sister said, then it would still be haram.
But if you're doing what you just
But
said,
you're alive.
Hmm?
But is favoritism haram?
No, like unjustified favoritism.
Okay,
Yeah,
but
because
haram, like,
you have one son and one daughter, and you just don't like your son, and you'd rather that your daughter gets everything, and out of your $100,000, you ended up giving $90,000 of that to your daughter, just to make sure that your son doesn't get anything, even though you did this in your lifetime. And you have the legal right to do that, but I think your intentions still matter as to why you're doing it.
So is
Your
there-
intentions still matter, even if it's a permissible act.
Is there a stipulation on how much can be gifted to someone during the life?
No, there isn't.
So and that's where I'm getting at. And
There
like,
is not.
There's different frowned upon. This might create animosity which you might be responsible for, and you might be judged for that animosity. But from a halal and haram perspective, if you're alive and you're going to give like a lot of money to somebody, can it be haram? And now, is it problematic? Is it ethical? Is it frowned upon? Those are different words. But is it haram?
I will refrain from calling it haram, just because that would be a pretty huge statement, obviously. There was something else that I wanted to say about this. I think that was really important. Okay, I kind of lost my train of thought.
Question answer session, because I know.
No, seriously, I think that was really important to know. Thank you for interrupting my train of thought. Yes, brother.
So we're talking about hair, and we're talking about inheritance law, and it's all inheriting the father or the previous generation's wealth. Is there an inheritance law around death? Like who inherits dad's
Who inherits what?
let's say my dad's debt that he owns.
Debt.
Debt.
It's bigger than the wealth that they're leaving behind.
I know all the focus of the Surah is on inheriting the money or the wealth or whatever, right?
Right.
But who is responsible for paying that off? Because I do have a personal situation where I'm kind of reflecting upon that. I think it's kind of interesting for me to kind of see is that also inheritable or not.
And so what you're saying is that the question here is: should you pay off the debt before distribution, or are you asking?
There's not enough wealth in the inheritance.
Or are you saying that there isn't enough wealth to even cover the debt?
It's not even
Yeah.
a topic.
Yeah.
Like,
There's
let's
no
say
wealth.
a person dies, who is responsible by laws of heredity or inheritance to pay off the debt? Is there a son responsible, brother, or a father, or a wife, or is that?
You're not going to like my answer. You're not going to like it because it's going to put you in a bind. You may not be legally responsible to pay off for your dad's debts, but if you didn't, your dad might go to hellfire.
So that goes to the son? Is that what, that's what I want.
To whoever inherits.
Anybody?
To whoever inherits.
No, if there is no inheritance, let's say dad died, no inheritance, but then you find out there is a debt.
The distributions of the debt are broken.
And is the amount again based on the same
In
percentage?
a way, it's
All the
philosophy,
sons
you
pay it?
break up the
All the
debts in
daughters pay
between
it?
all the
Well, it's supposed to be deducted first, and then the rest is distributed.
It's all debt. There's no inheritance at all.
There's no inheritance,
No
just
inheritance.
that.
All that's left is a debt from that parent. So like
Sorry,
it's
I'm just asking because
50,000
there's
in
a
debt.
specific
Yeah.
scenario I'm referring to, and I am kind of,
It's a real example, and I don't think it's far off.
Right.
I don't think it's far.
So there would be, for example, debts on a property, right? Let's say that you owe money on a property. What happens to that property after the owner dies? Who inherits the debt on that property in America?
basically, foreclosed and it's bank.
It'll be foreclosed. Like if we did not continue to make payments, the bank will just foreclose and will seize the property, right?
The property here itself is wealth in this example. We're talking about a person who dies, doesn't have any wealth,
They owe
but
like
has $50,000
And it's the
debt.
money they borrowed from neighbor and from the friends, and they all are lined up saying, who's paying me back now?
Right, and then there is enough money to pay off those debts?
No, there is no inheritance.
no
money.
inheritance.
Here's the thing.
It's like, as a son,
I
I'm
know, and
responsible.
I borrowed $20,000 from her. I have nothing on my name. I just say, hey, I need $20,000, and then I die. Oh, who's paying her?
I will just,
Oh, okay, so we're not talking about inheritance here, guys. Yeah, we're not talking about inheritance. Okay, no, now I see what you're saying. No, so the person who borrowed is the person who is responsible to pay off their debts.
So if I'm dead, her money's gone.
Yes, but if I have heirs that care about me, I would hope that they would pay off my debts because otherwise I'd be in trouble.
When my dad
It's like someone who did not perform Hajj and was capable of performing Hajj but did not. I might actually be punished unless unless one of my kids does Hajj on my behalf. So if I borrowed money and I owe that money and I did not pay it off before dying, I am responsible. Sure, I might actually go to hellfire for it. As a son or daughter, you're not responsible, but out of kindness and goodness, please try to pay it off on behalf of your parents if you could. Otherwise, if you are not financially capable of doing this, then just make dua for them, or whatever. Teach people the Quran, or do some act of kindness on their behalf, so that it might lessen the impact in the afterlife. But it's very problematic if we die owing debts. It's very problematic.
Can a deceased parent assign during the lifetime within the children that who's going to be responsible for paying the debt?
As long as there is money to pay. Like he can't say, to his son who happens to be a doctor, I wrote in my will that my son, the neurosurgeon, is going to pay the debt on my behalf. You cannot assign something that is not yours. You can only write the will with regard to your own wealth and not someone else's wealth. You can beg them, you can hope.
So in other words, we pray for good health and long life of people who go.
Absolutely, man.
Hopefully pay us back before they die.
Absolutely. Oh man, this was a dicey one.
Sorry, because I'm in a situation.
No, I did. There's also like a conversation about sexual inequity and impropriety that I needed to cover in ayah number 15, but I think this is actually a good spot to stop, and then I will get to this inshallah next time. We're skipping, by the way, next Sunday because it's going to be like the Eid break, and then we resume the Sunday after, inshallah ta'ala. Any questions, by the way? Any other questions? Because we have 20 minutes before Dhuhr.
I do have a question.
Yes.
A very practical thing that happens in our community a lot with kids who leave Islam. I've read somewhere in the Hadith that, I don't know if it's authentic or it's just like, I heard from Umar, that Muslims cannot inherit from non-Muslims, and non-Muslims cannot.
Yes, al-kafiru la yuwarrath. A kafir does not inherit.
So if someone's act of transgression are in such a way, like he does not formally denounces Islam. Like a kid does not formally denounces Islam, but like sending graphic pictures of him involving inappropriate acts, does that count as kufr?
No, it would still be considered under the purview of sin or violating the boundaries. Kufr has to be explicit and unequivocal. Like two people would not disagree that this is an act of kufr.
So in that scenario, if a Muslim man is married to a non-Muslim woman and he dies, does the wife still get the Sharia percentage or equity, or is it not a share in the equation?
She would not be considered a natural heir in that particular arrangement, in which case he can include her in the will. Because she is not Muslim. And it would be the kind thing to do.
A non-Muslim woman, but Islam allows a man to marry from the Christians and from the Jews, so that if it's allowed, then that is legally their wife.
Yeah, but
She is legally their wife. But my father could be kafir, but he's legally my father.
but being a Muslim supersedes the relationship of the wife and the husband.
Yes.
So that supersedes
Yes.
the
And just to be 100% sure, ask me this same question next time, and I will do some verification, just to be 100% sure that the non-Muslim spouse does not inherit. I think she does not, but ask me next time so I can confirm.
You got it. One more question, and I apologize if you've already explained this in the lecture and I missed it. But there are a lot of times when a father says, my son has no relationship with me and he doesn't want to, or my daughter doesn't, they don't live with me, or they don't talk to me, or from the ex-wife, the kids are with the ex-wife and they don't come and meet the father, and the relationship is strained because the father wasn't present in their lives. Now that father says that I would discard them, disown them from any inheritance. Is
That would not be legitimate.
No, but the thing is, here, let's say he says, I would like to give in my lifetime all my wealth to my nephew.
But we've already agreed that you can do whatever you want in your lifetime.
In the lifetime of
Yeah, we've already agreed to that. Yeah. You know, we're talking, she's asking about inheritance or excluding them from the inheritance.
So there's no emotional aspect to this. If the rules are what they are.
The rules are the rules.
Personal,
Exactly.
subjective, okay.
And if you wanna, if you feel that those rules in your particular situation would create some injustice, then redistribute that wealth in your lifetime.
Yeah, or supplement it with the will.
Exactly.
there's a living trust.
Yes?
So
You had another question?
Yes, ma'am.
Mhm.
So in states where they're banned Sharia, like Texas and then some other states, I don't know, Arizona or Kansas or something. So if people who wants to put that in the will that my wealth should be distributed as per the laws of Sharia, is that will binding to the state? First, and second question is the debt owed to institutions like banks and the government. For example, in India, a lot of farmers they don't have anything but the land, and that land is not of a lot of value. So what they do is they buy seeds with money, and if it doesn't rain, they cannot pay off their debt. If they cannot pay off their debt, a lot of them commit suicide because now they have to pay interest on their debt. So in that case, a lot of the time that that land is not enough to pay off the debt. Then what? So my question is, the debt owed to the institutions, is that still binding to the or not binding? Like, is it like a moral duty of the state to pay off that debt?
So let me address the question about institutional debt first, because the scholars actually, and modern scholars, classical scholars did not have to deal with this because they did not have financial institutions. People borrowed because they needed the money for immediate needs. They did not borrow for lifestyle adjustments. Okay, and so modern scholars, they make a distinction between lifestyle debt and essential debt. So essential debt is when I borrow $5,000 from a friend in order to feed my kids and to take care of my family. This is the debt, for example, that makes you eligible for zakah. It's the debt that exempts you from the requirement of hajj, for instance, right? As opposed to lifestyle debt, which is a debt that I incurred because I want to live in a different lifestyle. Right? So instead of renting a house, I want to buy a house. Instead of buying a small house, I want to buy a bigger house. So you cannot say, because I wanted to borrow $100,000 to buy a G-Wagon because I just like the Mercedes, you cannot say that, well, I have all this debt, therefore I cannot go to Hajj. Or I go to the masjid and apply for zakah because I'm making $5,000 payment on my Mercedes every month. Like, what am I supposed to do? Like, you can't do that, right? Like, logically speaking, we understand that there's a difference between those two types of debt. And therefore, from a Shari'i standpoint, most of the rules that we're talking about here apply to essential debt and not to lifestyle debt. Because lifestyle debt, I am willingly, voluntarily putting myself in difficult situations and paying riba and paying interest and stuff like that in order to improve my lifestyle. This was not, my life didn't depend on it, right? And so, suffices to say that the rules that I just discussed with you would apply, and the necessity of paying all the debt and stuff like that, that would apply to essential debt. Now, it needs, I think, more extensive investigation by a scholar to look at, your lifestyle debts. And if that person died, leaving payments on the car and payments on the business and payments on the house and stuff like that, what is the extent of their heirs? I think that requires like real scholarly investigation. I'm just talking about the essential basic debts that are owed to individuals. That has to be taken care of because it's real people with real needs. Yes?
Just a final thing from my side, I hope. We're talking about wasiyat or will.
Mm-hmm.
Again, a lot of things today I'm talking very personal education for me. After the death of a father or a grandfather, there are so many narrators from all over the place. They pop out and say, "Oh, your dad did this wasiyat to me, or your grandpa told me this," but there's nothing signed. There's no contract. There's no will registered anywhere. And people are dropping.
Well, there has to be shuhud. There has to be shuhud.
Yeah.
There has to be witnesses.
My question was that logistic procedure that is, like ours is tradition takes over, it's like.
And there has to, it's either it's written down and notarized and signed by two witnesses, or at least two witnesses can corroborate and verify that yes, on this day, at that hour, he did say this to that person. And so there has to be some type of verification process. Otherwise, anyone can just come and scam you.
And that's what is happening.
Yeah. No.
States that ban Sharia.
Hmm?
States that ban Sharia. Is there?
Oh, yeah. States that ban Sharia. So instead of saying in your will, I want my wealth to be distributed in accordance to Sharia, actually just spell it out. I want my wife to get this much, and I want my son to get this much, and I want my mom to get this much, and so on and so forth. Just spell it out and just save yourself the trouble. Otherwise, maybe some idiotic person in Texas might dismiss it just because it has the word Sharia in it. And you don't want that. And you understand that this whole thing about, anti-Sharia law, you understand that this is just like some kind of a stupid sham. It's a political thing that they're doing in order to continue to feed fuel to the fire and to get their supporters to vote for them. They know that it means nothing. Absolutely nothing. Yes?
Two questions. One, if you are a Muslim, but your parents are not Muslim, how do you address inheritance with them from your point of view? And two, if you have an essential debt to another person who helped you out of a bad situation, but you cannot pay it back, what happens?
So, as far as your parents are concerned, they're not natural heirs to a Muslim. Therefore, you can actually include them in your will and dedicate something to them in the event of your death. So that this would be a way to mitigate the situation. As to, what was your second question?
Essential debt. If
Yes.
someone gave you money to save your life, but you cannot pay them back, what happens?
Then are you hoping that you would leave wealth behind if you passed away?
Inshallah, but I don't
Yeah.
think it's gonna happen.
So actually state that in your will and have your will notarized. If I died and I died with wealth, I want $5,000 of that wealth to go to this person because it's a debt owed.
What if you die with no wealth and you don't pay that person back? What's going to happen?
Well, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah will not place a burden on you that you cannot fulfill, and therefore you've tried. You just need to ask that person for forgiveness, in your lifetime, and do what you can. Because if you don't have the money, what are you going to do? You can't steal, in order to give it to him. But you have to try. You have to try in your lifetime to pay it off, obviously.
If the person forgives you, then you're absolved.
If the person did forgive you, then you're absolved. You just have to, again, specify in your will, I owe this person $5,000. If I left behind enough, then please give it to him. If I left behind 2,000, then give it to him. Any amount, just give it to him. If I left absolutely nothing, then, just, there's nothing I can do.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Last question. What if you have student loan that is baked with the interest and you are supposed to pay it off, but you're also hoping that it will be forgiven? What do you do in that situation? Like, you want to pay it off, but you also have interest baked in it and you don't want to pay the interest part, so you make minimum payments, so on and so forth. How do you get away?
So you apply for an interest-based loan and you hope that you don't pay the interest? It sounds more like wishful thinking.
At that time when I applied.
Well, I tell you what, student loans are considered a lifestyle debt. They're not an essential debt, even though many modern scholars have made them permissible because it's become very difficult to get any higher education without loans, right? And so here's what people do though. When I graduated, when I finished my grad school, I had about $50,000 in debt. You know how long it took me to pay it off? 1 year. I literally squeezed every single resource, my entire inheritance, I think like $25,000. That was my share of my dad's wealth that was left behind. I paid off 50% of it, and then my salary, I maxed out on the amount that I could put in my student loans until, alhamdulillah, within 1 year, it was paid off. So for me, because I had the intention to get it paid off, alhamdulillah, it was paid off. And by the way, $50,000 20 years ago was a lot of money. It was a lot of money.
If you have the money no, loan should be your first.
And that's what people do. People keep dragging it on for years and years. And I know dentists who have like $400,000 in debt and they've graduated 20 years ago. Dude, what is wrong with you? Like you're making a ton of money. Why can't you make this a priority? And the system wants you not to pay. Or the system wants you to make minimum payments like you're saying. Because then it keeps snowballing and your principal keeps growing over time and it just becomes even more difficult to pay it off. If you have opportunities to apply for grants, if you have to apply, especially federal grants, because you pay taxes into the federal government and the federal government pays off your student loan, sounds like a fair arrangement. Okay? But to just sit idle for years and years and years and do nothing or very little, I think that would be unacceptable.
There's a loophole. 10 years of minimum payments, you can be forgiven, and then you don't pay any interest. So try that.
But the problem is that these laws change, sister.
This one is still in.
And a new administration will come and change those laws completely.
So it's 120 payments. You can get forgiveness for the federal loans. So that's 10 years. But you can use the income-based repayment at $0 to count towards those payments. So if you have been paying nothing, you can still get it forgiven because of this weird loophole. So, good luck, sister.
But you have to be, working for a FQHC.
No, not under this one. 10 years.
I'll let you guys continue that conversation offline, inshallah. Any other questions? You guys are really all chatter today. Wow. I'm sorry?
So, for example, someone kills someone, they cannot inherit from each other, right?
If someone murders someone, like
Yeah, so there's like,
so
happens a lot.
someone murdered his own father and then inherits from them, that would be fascinating. If convicted. If convicted. Yes?
I just wanted to clarify the use. If somebody passes away and they don't have a debt, then is that the priority from their inheritance to repay that debt before the son or anybody inherits?
Before distribution. Correct. Yeah. Alright guys. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. العصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاك الله خير والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله. And early Eid Mubarak for you guys, inshallah.